Hello everyone, thank you for joining me for another episode of Antonio's Movie Reviews. Today we have Never Talk to Strangers, a 1995 movie starring Rebecca De Mornay and Antonio Banderas. The movie was directed by Peter Hall, a man considered one of the most important in British theater as he was a prolific stage director. This is one of the few movies he did. De Mornay plays the unapproachable Dr. Sarah Taylor, a psychologist dealing with criminals, while Banderas, who ironically is named Antonio for this movie, is what he considers a surveillance consultant, whatever that means. Dennis Miller, who you may know as a sports commentator and comedian, plays Dr. Taylor's neighbor Cliff, who also vies for her affection. He provides a lot of comedy to the movie.
Who said anything about involvement? I just want to fuck.
I suggest that if you have not seen this movie, that you definitely check it out. It has a lot of surprisingly good twists. It's very unpredictable in my opinion.
I think you're confusing schizophrenia with multiple personality disorder.
What do you say? I think you may have certain personal issues regarding rape.
Like you might have, say.
With that being said, I'll try not to spoil too much of the movie for you guys.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
After you? No.
Excuse me?
Bad choice.
Ever had cholera?
Ever had latage? You don't know what you're missing.
I don't know you.
My name is...
Mr. Ramirez, we're strangers. And I was raised to never talk to strangers.
You never talk to strangers, you'll never make any friends.
Uh-huh.
You live in the neighborhood.
One day she's out grocery shopping and she finds herself dead meat when she runs into Antonio Banderas, named Tony Ramirez for the film. He woos her with this knowledge of fine wines, namely Latache, which a 1961 vintage cost about $4,000 at least from my research. Ramirez ends up getting Dr. Taylor's number, and we immediately think that based on the cover of the movie and also the title that Banderas must be the bad guy of the film, but he definitely doesn't come off that way. Although he looks a bit sly and we see that Dr. Taylor is apprehensive, we see that when she goes home her father is there, and we're immediately shown that he's a sickly man, which I guess he uses to get into the house, but also that Dr. Taylor doesn't call him father.
Now, they even offer me a drink.
I don't have any liquor in the house. If I'd have known you would come.
Stay on the couch tonight. Every dollar counts right now.
Once we see how she feels about her father, we really don't know who the stranger may be.
Do you have plans for Christmas?
This movie immediately involved me within its storyline as soon as the movie started. It basically has a lot of red herrings involved, like her creepy neighbor played by Dennis Miller. He asked for some vodka, which we heard her just tell her dad there's no alcohol in the house, but at the same time, she could have been wrong. We'll see that later. But she gets a call from Mr. Ramirez, and she also decides to go out for the date, or what she calls a wine tasting of the 1961 Latache. Going to a date at Antonio Banderas' house probably isn't going to work out too well for her, which we know from the movie that this is sort of what they call an erotic thriller, which I don't consider the movie that myself. It's more of a romantic crime drama in my opinion. Dr. Taylor definitely seems smitten.
Stranger.
You know what I mean.
You need more wine.
And you never heard from him again?
Not a word.
Now he sells security devices.
Alarm systems.
From Albany. That was way back. Yeah, car crash.
I'm sorry.
What about your father?
This movie has a great plot in my opinion, mainly due to De Mornay's stellar acting. She really played this role well. She also was one of the executive producers for the movie, so she obviously wanted to play the role herself. We're used to seeing Rebecca De Mornay in a villainous role as she played in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle in 1992. We also know that she can be a very sexy character as we saw in 1983's Risky Business, but in this movie, she is very believable as a victim. She gets the first of many nasty packages delivered to her, and she suspects that it must be Tony when she sees him shooting off this gun at the carnival.
You take the trigger.
No, no, the draft.
I have to highlight Banderas' range for doing this movie. This is the role that Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal wanted to do. You keep waiting to see Banderas beat someone up, but he's definitely not in this movie for that. I'm glad he chose this role.
Tony, did you send me flowers?
Flowers.
It's hard for me to trust people.
All over me. The next one, you're pushing me out. What the hell is that? All over. Well, seem that way to me.
In this scene, it sort of threw me off because we can't tell if Tony is really after her for who she really is or if he has some sort of ulterior motive, especially when he treats her this way, but it's not what you think. Up until this point, Banderas has sort of been asking Dr. Taylor a lot of questions, and she really doesn't know anything about him at all. So it's sort of believable that she would feel, a bit suspicious about who he is and exactly what his goals are as to their relationship. She gets a strange letter in the mail that just says Section D, page 6. So later on, when she's reading the newspaper, she makes that connection, and what do you know, it turns out to be her obituary, which would have been scary as heck in my opinion. I mean, this was one of the parts that I honestly, sort of like got chills with, but I definitely liked that it was in the movie. Tony shows up to the house immediately and notices that that furnace or whatever that was a bit loose, but he didn't do anything about it. Fire starts, he's yet to save her again, and then we're led to believe that her neighbor is actually creepy when we hear him listening outside of the door.
I don't feel comfortable calling you Dad. I told you that.
Banderas is particularly interested in Dr. Taylor's ex-boyfriend, Benny, who apparently just came up missing and she doesn't know anything about it.
Why do you think...
What?
Why do you keep the photo?
I want to know everything about me. I mean, what do I know about you?
Nothing.
She then gets a call from her father, which at this point we see Banderas, we see Cliff, and then we also get a call from her father, all during which that suspicious package was delivered.
Hang on a sec, I got a parcel for you.
As I mentioned earlier, Rebecca De Mornay really adds a lot of the thriller aspect to this film, especially when she gets that package open and she screams. Like, I've never thought of her as a scream queen because I'm so used to seeing her as a villainous person, but she could have very well been great in a horror movie. She goes to the police station and we see a bit of an outburst that we're not used to seeing from her, which is sort of a trigger for me in my mind of where this movie is going, which I won't really call it unpredictable, but you kind of have an idea as to what's going on. Well, you might, but it seems that our prime suspect definitely does not, because once he barges into her apartment, that's his first question. And who's there to save her? The neighbor.
What's going on?
Don't touch me.
I said, hey. Yeah, I'm Cliff. She said it's a bad time, pal, don't you?
Are you out?
The movie is also very short at only an hour and 25 minutes.
I wish you could trust me.
I mean that, like, there was such a slow build-up of the movie. It's like the opening half an hour is one of the slowest that you'll see. And that, in turn, makes it so that the ending of the movie, it ends up coming at you all at once. Like, there's so many different plot lines that at times it's kind of hard to follow what's going on, but then again there's this underlying aspect of the title of the movie, and that someone has to be this stranger that, I mean, the movie is about. The climax has to be building up at this point because there's only 35-40 minutes left of the movie. It looks like Cliff is a bit tired of seeing that motorcycle parked outside the apartment building, and at this point, I don't blame him. There's only like 40 minutes left. I just said that, but it's like, I thought Banderas was the bad guy here. Dr. Taylor just can't be convinced that Tony is a good guy, so she ends up hiring this detective who, to me, couldn't be more obvious, especially when you're following Desperado around. Like, this was a very suspenseful part of the movie, and honestly, I really enjoyed it, but I just have to say that, It was very involving for me at this point because I was just waiting for the climax to, you know, bestow its grace upon me after all of this time. And then after all of that dramatic buildup, it really only leads to seeing Banderas hug a girl who isn't even his wife, as we find out later on. Cliff also sees someone leaving Sarah's apartment.
Listen, let's meet at my place.
And here again we hear Banderas sounding real naive and also real foreign as to what's going on in terms of the detective following him. He obviously doesn't sound like he knows about that. Meanwhile, when he tells Sarah that he's at the airport, she goes to his apartment and finds a file on herself, which it turns out that Banderas is actually a detective for Benny, her ex-boyfriend that was hired by Benny's family to discover what actually happened to Benny, in which case you'll find out soon. So Sarah goes back to her apartment and it looks like someone in pure poop has written that on her wall, in which case we now find out the purpose of that loose furnace. She narrowly escapes, and that's a very suspenseful part as well. I mean, this is all in the last 20 minutes of the film. It just all comes at you right at once, honestly. She gets dropped off by the police and it turns out someone's there waiting for her. It turns out Tony actually was a surveillance consultant because he had the bright idea of installing a surveillance camera outside of her apartment door to see who was leaving all of these nasty packages. And what do you know? Guess who it is? None other than Dr. Sarah Taylor herself. At that time, her father walks into the room and those shoes end up triggering some sort of episode for her that reminded her of what actually went on in her past. And this is a great twist. Don't let the things that I said about this movie take away from the twist that this movie led you to. You have to actually, that's why I say watch it before you see this review, because this review could greatly take away from the movie itself. You have to see it with bright eyes and not have any sort of bias within your head, and it'll be a great experience. I mean, take it from me. I honestly had one thing in my mind just by seeing the cover and the title, and the movie was everything but that. Honestly, especially this scene. It was really surprising. This was the greatest scene in the movie, and they saved it until the end. I think the story does well in piecing everything together without it feeling too cluttered. The film has a very neo-noirish vibe with great use of the musical score throughout the film. In terms of fat to trim, for lack of a better phrase, I don't really see much of that in this movie, except for the love scenes being a bit too lengthy, but that adds a lot to the realism of their relationship, in my opinion. It's like the entire time I was thrown off as to thinking that Banderas was this stranger that you should never talk to, but it turned out to be Dr. Sarah Taylor herself. And at the end, we see that she's actually started a relationship with Cliff. And that in itself is irony, because we heard that he didn't even want any involvement. But I hope that you enjoyed my review on Never Talk to Strangers, 1995 movie directed by Peter Hall. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the film, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks.